You may be our first podcast chat since March 13th.
Yes,
You may be the first person we've talked to since 97 is rolled out.
Oh, amazing. I am so happy to be talking to you. I swear to God, I've gone through this book multiple times.
Oh, very good.
Before I get into it, though, I have to say, not just X-Men, guys. I grew up watching your stuff, like Beetlejuice and RoboCop and Gargoyles. Like, that was all the stuff. Not to make you feel old.
Oh, no.
It's funny. I wasn't even born yet when I was working on those shows. I don't know how that worked out, And we apologize in advance. We have 2 dogs in here and they can get a little needy, but we'll try and keep them as quiet as possible. So,
I set this date and I was hoping I wouldn't have to cancel on you because my wife is due any second. So,
congratulations.
Thank you very much. But it was one of those things where we were like, okay, I've got this really important interview. I was telling my wife.
and
I'm just like,
Hold
it in. Just a little
man, I
while
swear.
longer.
No, that's the important thing.
It is.
That's
it
the
is.
important thing.
Good. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's our first, so we're very excited.
Oh my goodness. We can share with you our 2 adult sons each got married within the last year and a half, and both of them and their wives are expecting now, and we
This
could
summer.
not be more thrilled.
So we're very close to being grandparents.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Months away.
Yeah, no, it's the first grandchild for both of our parents as well. So they're all super excited.
Oh, I can imagine.
So I'm good to go whenever you are, and then we can just kick things off.
We will answer whatever we can, but we'll let you know when we can't.
All right, here we go. You're listening to the Goggler Podcast with me, Uma, and I am thrilled to be joined today by Julia and Eric Lewald. They are the creators of the OG X-Men animated series from back in the 90s. Eric, Julia, this is an absolute pleasure. And I think, like a lot of fans, I was incredibly apprehensive going into X-Men 97. But I think Bo DeMeo and his team might have pulled off something quite remarkable in being able to strike that balance of making something that feels fresh and exciting while still being a loving tribute to what you guys created all of those years ago. It's remarkable.
We agree. We didn't envy him. We thought that what a terribly difficult situation. 9 out of 10 times when they try to redo something, a beloved show, or do a newer version of it, it falls flat, and the people that loved the old show hate it, and the people that didn't know the old show don't know why they should like it. And he really did. He walked this wonderful tightrope and they spent 3 years focused. They started working 3 years ago, and we just admire, their job. I think it's harder. When we did our job, there were very low expectations, and that had its own problems with budgets and schedules. But that we didn't have the whole Marvel world looking over our shoulders.
I was just going to say, because the other additional thing is fans be, pardon my French, a-holes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They are challenging.
Challenging, that's the right word.
30 years ago, social media didn't exist.
There wasn't even an internet, much less social media.
Nope. Now we were made aware of the fact that X-Men was a big hit when it was happening.
After the fact.
Well, no, I mean, when it was happening, we get the ratings, but that was like, we have it over there. We have like a fax of, here are this week's ratings.
Here's some numbers.
But that's all the information we were getting. Fox was very happy with the show. You kept getting re-upped to do more episodes, but we didn't necessarily get the kind of response it was having among the fans until much later. Until decades later.
Yeah, until we started going to cons about 6 years ago and realized there are hundreds of millions of people around the world that watch the show.
And they're all in their 40s.
Yeah, they are. In fact, near Malaysia, when we visited Singapore for a job, and there were Malay...
I was wearing a previously on X-Men shirt.
And there were Malay TSA agents there that were helping us on a baggage. And they said, stop, wait, you worked on the X-Men show? And she got all her other agents together. So it was our favorite. And so, if people are watching it 9,000 miles away, it must have got the whole world.
I was just going to say, because you guys would have gotten US ratings, and you talk a bit about that in the book, but of course, we were getting it all the way out here. And I don't know whether you were aware, apart from the cons, that even when 97 was announced, I think the Malaysian fan base went nuts. So know that there are people thousands of miles away that grew up and were heavily influenced by the work that you did. It's quite impressive.
Well, and the fact that we're here talking about X-Men 97, which again, 5 years ago, we couldn't have fantasized. We weren't fantasizing about. We were just grateful that we were able to connect with fans who really loved the original X-Men series. And then the fact that we're talking to you right now because X-Men 97 happened, and we and Larry Houston have been invited back as consulting producers. You never get invited back to the dance in Hollywood. You never get invited back.
It's very gracious of them to have us. I mean, they did all the work. Just to be honest, we were the old team in there nodding and saying, "Yes, you're doing very well. Thank you. Keep working." But it's all they're doing. We have credits, but just very, very, very barely earned credits.
But I was going to say that's so rare, and you're absolutely right. Every time they do reboots, requels, whatever, they never get the old guys back in, which I feel is always a sad thing because it's a different set of eyes that actually could add something. How did you get that call? How did that work?
So you had written in 2017, came out with a book, The Previously on X-Men, what is basically an oral history. God, yes.
Yeah.
And then that got you an email that we thought was shutting us down. It was from Sven Larson, the head of global licensing for Marvel Disney. And we thought, oh, he's going to crush us. Instead, he said, no, now that Disney has the rights, we love your book. We want to do one about the art. Would you be interested? It's like, oh, wait, Disney and Marvel. Interesting that they got the rights together.
Yeah. And so we figured then that they were planning ahead and that they knew that
we had no idea what.
Yeah. We knew that X-Men would be something that they want to do in the future. But I guess for them, one of the advantages was we did the art book for them, and then they had kind of a Bible. They had 300 pages. Okay, here are all the designs. Here are all the decisions that we went into making our show. Here were the feelings. Here the way we telling the stories. So besides ending up with a nice book, they kind of got an introduction into, okay, if we're going to do a show, let's pick the brains of the people that did the first one. And so we did that second book.
And then we'd heard rumors that, there may be something happening. Marvel is probably eyeballing an X-Men project. That was kind of all we'd heard. And then got an oblique phone call, all using code names and code words, which we're not going to share right now, but you got a project coming up? You'd be interested in talking with us about?
And Bo DeMaio was so clever with this when he had the two of us and Larry get on. COVID was still a bit of a problem. Mm. We're getting on a Zoom call, and he hadn't announced it to the team, but he had 70 crew members of the mostly artists and writers and staff.
Oh wow!
Waiting offline to say, okay, well, there's 3 guests going to come on today that we're going to add to the team. We didn't know, we wanted to let you get to know them. And then they introduced us, and it was very emotional because they'd already spent a good 9 months of their lives going through everything that we'd done before, and they were all big fans. He made that a requirement of employment. He said you had to love the original show before you could work on this one. Mm-hmm. And so we were brought on that moment. It was a surprise to the staff.
People were crying. It was like, oh my God, for us, it was the most emotional. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful validation of what we'd done and what they were doing, and that we got to be a nominal part of that. And by nominal, I mean, they said, we want you to be our first audience. We want you to see everything we're doing.
And again, we gave some notes, but to be honest, and I'd like to think they listened to everyone, but the new show would be 99% the same show if they hadn't made this gracious gesture to us. We just provided a very little bit.
Amazing. I think a lot of people have very fond memories of the original series, but what I think they don't realize is just how revolutionary it was at the time. But before we get into that, I was wondering if you could just paint me a small picture of what animation was like back in 1992, because based on your book, it feels like frontier animation. And I say that meaning you guys looked like you were constantly breaking new ground and like pushing the envelope as far as you could go.
Very much so. I think we felt frustrated. Growing up, we both loved storytelling and movies and television shows, and even say older animation like the Warner Brothers cartoons,
Yes.
which were very sophisticated in their humor, some of them, and we got in the mid '80s when I started out here in Hollywood. It seemed kind of like people weren't trying very hard to be very ambitious. There was Saturday mornings filled with cartoons, but the action shows were kind of slow and not very dramatic. And we were thrilled, to have work in Hollywood because what a dream come true.
We
But
met out here. I'm just
yeah,
going to emphasize.
yeah.
you
We
came out-
both moved out here from far, a couple thousand miles away. Moved out here to California to try to work in the business, and we get in the business, and the storytelling from some of the shows wasn't particularly challenging, and we often were hit with this idea of, well, you're making shows for children, dumb them down a lot. Don't challenge them. Don't disturb them by having something that they might not understand. And that just seemed contrary to our own memories of our own childhood. And so when we got together, all these wonderful things came together at the same time. We got together with people like Will Mineo and Larry Houston, who were leading the charge on the art side, and the people at Fox like Sidney I. Wander and Margaret Lesh.
President of Fox Kids, to whom we owe everything.
All of these people had been working a good while in the business. Every one of us was frustrated, thinking, why couldn't we do more with this? And Margaret just said, look, now I'm the head of Fox Kids. It's a new network. We're trying to get noticed. So I'm going to not only let you be more ambitious, I'm going to demand that you be more ambitious and challenging, and to get some attention to our little network here. The three big American networks at the time, ABC, NBC, CBS, had over 90% of the audience.
They had a lock on Saturday morning for kids.
Yeah.
Fox was maybe 5%. And so there was an opportunity. There was thoughtful people above us, our executives, our bosses, saying, be as ambitious as humanly possible, as opposed to, oh, no, pull back, soften that, simplify that. So all these things came together. We all wanted to do something new and different. And we'd all had enough years in the business that pushed us into wanting to. And so at the time, as I said, we were waiting to see if audiences liked it or not. The people involved, the people putting the money up, the sponsors, the network people looked and said, well, this is awfully different. These look very adult. I don't know if any children are going to watch this or buy my product that's being placed during the show. How in the world are you letting these writers and artists write and draw like this? And Margaret Lesh, to her credit, kept on just saying, trust me, kids will love this, and older audiences will love this. It'll double the audience or triple the audience. And that's exactly what happened.
And I want to jump in here. We can look back and say, oh, it's 76 episodes of X-Men, the animated series. When you were first hired, you were hired to do 13 episodes the first season. And that was considered, at the time, those were the 13 episodes that Margaret Lesh's own boss said, I'll give you 13. But when this crashes and burns, that's your job and you're out of here.
And then all the creative staff was let go as soon as we finished our work. And it was going to be 3.5 months until the show premiered. So we
didn't know. We
all went off to work on other things while we waited.
Yeah. And then you got the call to come back, but you got the call to come back when it was a hit to do another 13. So that was just the second season.
Again, the people in Hollywood just didn't believe that comic book superheroes could be successful as a TV show.
So after that, they got the call and tapped you to come back in 4 seasons, 3, 4, and then 5. We'll talk about that. But the whole thing now kind of looks like it was of a piece. That's what X-Men was. But X-Men was actually a series of seasons that we didn't know we'd get the next opportunity to do. And again, it was all credit to Margaret.
I have to say, I mean, I do a lot of these interviews, and I don't think I've heard people speak that fondly about a studio executive before. So there you go. But very quickly, just talk to me about Margaret Loesch, because even in your book, there is this notion that she saw something in the X-Men.
Yes.
And she thought it was a great idea, and she had a bee in her bonnet about it. And did she ever tell you what it was about the comics or the characters that she knew would work? It felt like she knew it would work.
And she knew it would work for some time, but it was one of these sort of, because she'd spent 10 years working at Marvel Productions. Well, what's Marvel Productions? It was a production company here in Los Angeles that was work for hire. For example, I think it was Muppet Babies and Spider-Man. There were various.
They did all sorts of things that weren't just Marvel things, but
Right,
yes,
right.
yes. But she saw, as soon as she saw the books, because she was the comic book, she said, every adolescent in America that we are trying to get to watch our show has felt like an outsider, like somebody other. X-Men is perfect to pitch for kids, to young teenager audience. There's no other Marvel book that's as perfectly set up to tell the kind of stories I think will resonate, and also will resonate with young women, because at the time 80-90% of the audience for action cartoons were boys. It was literally referred to as boys adventure. That was the genre. It was called Boys Adventure as a series. So she said, not only is this the very best Marvel property of all of them, she thought, to touch an adolescent's heart, but it also will have this whole new group of people. All the women, young girls will get hooked on it too. So it just instinctively, she understood the storytelling about the X-Men that's specific to X-Men, about them all being different in a society that has the power over them.
And the genius of X-Men is, you're born this way. There is nothing you can do about it, but you don't necessarily know about it until you hit adolescence. And for anyone who's gone through adolescence, everything's changing. Everything, oh my God, everything feels like the other. And then to see in the X-Men stories the brilliant personification of that as a mutant power, and further that some of the mutant powers, there are reasons other humans are scared of them, because they're big, they can hurt people. But there are other mutants with powers who are not like that. And it was a brilliant allegory. Is that the right word?
Yeah,
Allegory?
and
I'm gonna
yes.
say allegory.
So yeah, she saw that right away, and I don't think any of her bosses did. I don't think, but yeah, to her everlasting credit, we on the writing staff saw it right away. In like 30 minutes. Oh my God. Because I didn't know the comic book. We didn't know the comics very well. My head writer that worked with me on most of the episodes, Mark Edens, he didn't know the comic books. We just knew emotional, dramatic storytelling, and we looked at this world and said, "Oh, this world's set up perfectly to tell dramatic stories." So that's it. We got it right away too. But Margaret was the one that understood for years before it got on the air.
You hit the nail on the head, which a lot of bad movies, TV shows, not just superhero ones, kind of miss, which is, I think if you tell an emotional, dramatic story, it'll work, irrespective of the material, right? And I think that's the big takeaway from even watching the first season of your show, whether it was Days of Future Past or all of these big X-Men stories. You got to the core of the emotion behind it. And that's what we got while reading the comic books.
The team you chose, because it was on Eric and Will to craft the actual team of X-Men, because you had 29 to pick from.
Right.
And we all, Wolverine's got claws, Rogue, she sucks people's energies. But for each of these X-Men, and they've got spandex and they've got great powers, the very thing that makes them who they are in this world is also their own personal biggest heartbreak. Like if Rogue switched with Wolverine, oh my God, she could touch people, she could not use her claws, she would be so happy. And if Wolverine couldn't touch somebody without sucking their juices out, he would just go live in the woods and be happy. So the thing that we each go, that's the coolest thing, is also each character's own personal burden and heartbreak. And what you just said about the personal stories. That was always the most important thing.
Yeah. When Mark and I looked at the comics at like first night when we were given the job and had to come up with this world in about 2 weeks, and we just thought, well, there are two major things through 30 years of comics. There are, who's more powerful? I'm more powerful. No, I'm more powerful. No, I'm more powerful. So it's kind of like it's kind of like professional wrestling, where you say, okay, who's going to beat who? Okay, that's interesting, but that's kind of thus our minds that was kind of like shootouts in a Western. They've got to be there, but it's not what the core of the stories are. What we saw this thing about the X-Men not being accepted by the society and feeling different and other and excluded. So that's where 80% of the drama is going to come from. So we very consciously crafted the stories to more focus on the X-Men being other rather than the fights, because we knew the fights would come, the spectacle would be there. It's just part of their world. But yeah, the thing that we always went back to starting the stories, okay, let's make as dramatic a character story. Like what's the most dramatic rogue story you can tell? Well, does she decide to give up her powers?
Why? Because those are killing her. She can't touch anybody.
Is she so miserable that she's gonna stop being an X-Men and give her powers up and walk away and or not? Or does she work through it? So those are the stories that appeal to us, not is somebody bigger, is somebody stronger, or is the building going to fall, or is the building not going to fall? So that was our personal taste, and it seemed to have a universal appeal. And but it's just what made us happy telling stories.
And a deep dive, if you go back and watch the first 3 episodes of X-Men, Night of the Sentinels Part 1, then Part 2, and then Enter Magneto, you open the first mutant you see, it's the news footage of Sabretooth going, just taking out police officers. And it's like, oh my God.
Throwing cars.
Mutants are scary. And we see that mutants are a threat to humans. And then we introduce members of the team, the X-Men team, and they're trying to do what's right. They're trying to work with humans. You don't bring Magneto in until episode 3. So it's not this mutant versus that mutant. It is a bigger philosophical discussion that you set up that way.
Yeah, how do mutants fit in this world? And we didn't want the human beings, the normal humans, to be irrational or stupid or have no reason for their fears. We wanted the fears to be real, and it just makes for more complex storytelling. So it's not just a bunch of very nice people fighting a bunch of very bad people every week and somehow winning. So we wanted, and we also wanted, when we talked to Margaret about this, I said, look, in the comics have become older and more sophisticated in the 70s and 80s. The comics in the 60s are more juvenile and younger. And so something had happened where they'd written in and brought in older characters, more diverse characters, people from all over the world. And I said, look, what we've been handed is a bunch of 20 somethings and 30 something, these adults, these young adults with real adult problems, except for Jubilee was our one concession to teenagers. But we want to write them as if they were real adults and not pretend characters.
Take me behind the scenes of that, because in the book, you print one of your letters, Eric, which I think is an absolute masterclass in dealing with difficult people. My wife works in communications, and I showed her that letter, and she was like, oh, this is brilliant. This is a genius way to handle someone who's got a problem with your work. Talk to me about that, because obviously you're doing these things that are darker, more grown up, in an environment where everyone is going, hey, dumb it down, kids are stupid, they're not going to be able to get it.
A lot of my job, people wonder, we did 76 episodes, and I only took a writing credit on a couple of them.
And you juggled 20 writers total over the series.
Yeah, there were 20 different people that worked on it. The majority of my time, even though I really enjoyed writing, I would, of course, do all the polishes. I do all the rewrites on the scripts. But majority of my time was dealing with, say, half a dozen other people with interest, say Marvel or the network, or all these people had a legitimate interest in the stories. And sometimes, the English language is not a perfect thing, or people have different tastes. And so sometimes they didn't understand what we were trying to do in a story, and they were genuinely concerned. And sometimes I felt they were being silly. Sometimes I said, oh my God, they may be right, but I really love the story, so I'm going to have to try to talk them into it somehow gently. I spent a lot of my time writing and receiving faxes and taking phone calls.
Faxes,
because it was before email. Gently saying, well, yes, I understand 80% of what you've asked for me to do, but this last 20 it's going to hurt a little here. And if we could find a third way to do it. So was being a diplomat and respecting the fact that they had a job to do. A lot of people in our business just resent the fact that they're given any direction by other people. And obviously, I'm sure I did that when I was starting out and I was young and thought everything I wrote was perfect. But really, they all, there are millions and millions of dollars at stake. And what that means is that how we craft our stories is going to affect hundreds and hundreds of people on the business side. And they deserve to be listened to if they have questions. And so what we did was, over the years, built up trust. I mean, our biggest one was the censor, was the broadcast standards lady, who really, our Amy Coburn, she was wonderful.
Avery Coburn deserves credit.
Her word was law.
Mhm.
And if she said, no, these X-Men can never do anything but sit on a couch and sip tea and talk to each other, that would have been 76 episodes of that.
Or
13.
Or 13, because it would have got this. In dealing with her, say, talking about things like killing a character, like we did in the first episode, the first story, or a religious show, which we did at about episode 45. And so, in talking to her, she brought up real, anybody else would have just said no. But we had built enough trust that she's, okay, listen, I know why this is a touchy subject for you in the network, and you could have lots of families be upset by this. This could be, but here's what we'll do with it. And please give us some boundaries. Let us do this a bit. Let us do this in good faith. And you read our next draft of this, and we'll take your considerations. So there's a constant negotiation, and the only way to be successful with negotiation is to respect the person you're negotiating with and try to find a way to make them happy. As we laughingly said in Star Trek, which we both grew up loving, the original, two or three times in that show, Captain Kirk would get frustrated and said, because each of the ideas, because there was one idea that was bad, another bad idea was bad. Said, gentlemen, I need that third alternative.
Yeah.
So that's
we oftentimes found ourselves, if it were a difficult question, that I wouldn't stick with my initial idea, and I'd ask that the other person or persons wouldn't stick with their initial idea because I couldn't live with what they were suggesting. Let's find a third way that makes us both, if not happy, at least satisfied.
As a kid growing up, the first X-Men comic that I bought myself was Jim Lee's X-Men 1. Now, I didn't know anything about X-Men at the time, but I knew I had never seen characters drawn that way before.
Yeah.
And so I had a couple of questions for you. One, of course, is how did you settle on that design as opposed to the 30 years of X-Men designs before that? And of course, the really exciting thing in your book, which was Jim and gang were leaving to form Image, and that caused a whole uproar. Oh, you can't use these designs. It's nuts. He's going away.
a reminder that, okay, back then you got the call to go in for the meeting where you became the story editor showrunner for X-Men, the animated series, was in February 92. The plan was develop, write, animate everything and have it on the air by September of 92. That was the goal,
which is crazy.
And understanding that the animation, after the hundreds of images on storyboards, everything would then be shipped overseas to be hand painted. The work was insane.
Hundreds of thousands of paintings per episode.
And then sent back to the US So the deadline was already crackers. Then Will Mineo and Larry Houston
Who
and
really decided on the design. Those two gentlemen decided Jim Lee's is of the dozen that they liked, Jim Lee's is the most animation friendly, the cleanest, the ones that they both had over a dozen years of experience producing animated shows. They knew what would animate well, they knew what wouldn't, and would just be too expensive to do. So they picked Jim's as the most practical and the one that they like. So they made the choice.
So now Marvel Comics
Yeah.
was in New York City and everything else was happening in Los Angeles. And you go, okay, so what? Well, back then, 3-hour time zone difference, no cell phones, faxing. Fridays, their offices shut down at 2 or 3 o'clock our time, and they didn't open up until Monday. And you're losing those 72 hours every week unless you're all on the same page. So the designs, the Jim Lee designs, oh, okay, great. And the stuff you were getting back, this looks great. So we're already into production.
We're 2 months in, and then Will gets the head designer gets a letter. You're going to have to throw out all the designs and redesign the whole team and the whole world.
What? Why?
And they didn't say why.
No,
They did not tell us. Yeah. So Will just said, "Oh my God, this is horrifying. We're already at least a month behind. We're rushing everything. We're working our artists to the bone. We can't do this." And so what he did, you know the anecdote. He said, "Okay," and he sent in a fresh set of designs to them on a Friday, late that Friday,
without telling
anybody else. He just said, "Okay, do you want a new design? Here's a new design." It was it looked like a bad artist trying to do Scooby-Doo version design of the X-Men. It's okay. Here you go. You realize, and so people started seeing it. Stan Lee saw it, and other artists. Rick Hoberg and our shows. People started.
Oh wow.
Calling Wills, what's going on? What's going? You can't. Yeah. And so over the weekend, evidently, it got to enough people at Marvel that they realized, well, this business about not letting it look like Jim Lee because Jim just left, that's petty and vindictive, and we don't need this. No, it's good. It's good for the show that it looks like this. This is appropriate. And Will made his point. He said, "You want the best look for the show, or do you want to make sure that Jim Lee doesn't profit from it? Which is higher on your priority list?" And so, they could have fired him over that.
Oh yeah.
But he took a great risk there. It took some serious courage, but he did that thing, and it's a wonderful story in retrospect.
Talk to me about the fight for serialized television. Obviously, growing up, we didn't. Even growing up, and I was watching, I remember there was a science fiction show called Babylon 5 by J. Michael Straczynski. It's a brilliant show, but of course, the kind of battles he had to go through, it's, I think, Warner back then, in maintaining those incredibly long 22, 24 episode arcs. And that was for grown-up adult television. I'm assuming the battle for children's television must have been a lot harder.
Actually, give Margaret credit.
Again,
Will Mineo went to her and said, "I know you've never let us do this in the past. I know why you don't let us do this, because if episode 3 comes back terrible
from overseas,
we can't show episode 4. If it takes a month to fix episode 3, we're on reruns for a month."
So sorry, let me stop you there for a second. So it was a production decision as opposed to a audience not being able to get it decision?
It was both.
Oh,
it was both.
Okay.
So that it was both, kids won't be able to follow this and keep track of it. And then there's this terrible production question. And so Will said, "No, look, you have to give, you've been giving credit to the kids for everything else, to challenge them. This is the way comic books work. The best comic books. We grew up in love with comics. One of the reasons is every month we rush to our mailbox, or we rush down to the drugstore and get the newest version, because they have a cliffhanger and the story goes through maybe a dozen issues over a course of a year. And that's part of the comic book experience. And Will just begged, "Look, Margaret, please, can we try that? I know it's a big risk for you, but I don't believe you got anything to worry about with the kids. They will catch on. And then our editor came up with this idea of saying, oh, we could do this previously on X-Men at the beginning and recap like they do in primetime TV shows.
Like Hill Street Blues,
Like
like St. Elsewhere.
Yeah, like in the challenging primetime shows, we can do that, and that will even save 45 seconds of animation time because it makes
Right.
it
Because
shorter.
we're reusing the old
So
animation.
that argument came through fine. But the production argument was more just, okay, let's have our fingers crossed that we don't have bad episodes. Well, the first season we get back episodes, and I think it was literally
I think it was.
episode 3. It was terrible, and so as a result, between the fact that the schedule was way too short, the project was much more ambitious than the animators had thought. There were a half dozen teething problems in getting the show started. Margaret made the big decision that instead of premiering in September, it would premiere in January. So she called all the business people, all the advertisers, and said, I'm sorry, for 4 months, we're going to have to show repeats, but I'm not going to put this on the air until the show's right. And we've committed to a connected story, and we're going to do that. And it just means we have a delay before we start. And in retrospect, it was wonderful. It made everybody all the more anxious to see it when it came out in January. And she even teased them in October and November with a sneak preview showing of the first story to get the fans excited. And so it ended up being a good thing. But at the time, she was in effect asking her partners, give up $1 million of income to delay this for me because it's important that the show be right. Mm-hmm. And they did it.
That's amazing. And of course, going back to what you were saying, it's not just how we experience comics, but also as a comic book reader, sometimes you go into X-Men in issue 35 and it doesn't matter. You'll never get 34 and 33. But out here in Malaysia, there were no big comic shops. We had no access to back issues. We just picked up whatever we could read, and it'd be halfway through an arc.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the child brain would just fill in the backstory.
Yes.
What's interesting about what you guys did was, of course, in season 2 to fix that, I think the mini arc was a genius idea.
Yes, yeah.
This idea of being able to slot stuff in everywhere. And that even countered whatever production issues you might run into.
It did. We were able to, as the one you're referring to, we did 13 episodes. The first one was a 2-parter. There were 9 individual episodes which could be moved around and really weren't in any chronological order. And then the last 2 summed up the story, concluded the story that was being started in the first ones. So the production, you're right, the production problem was answered by the fact that they produced the first 2 episodes, made sure that they were good, and then they produced the little bits, the little 30-second bits, the 9 of them that went on the next 9 episodes that were continuous with Professor X and Magneto, produced those all early. So we'd have those all together. And then literally, if episode 5 wasn't ready, they could have put episode 7 before it and just made sure to keep the little 45-second bit in order, and it wouldn't have been a problem. And looking back, we were very proud of ourselves because Margaret had come to us and said, this has cost us so much money, we can't do 13 in a row again. I said, okay, well, let's kind of halfway do it and see if the audience still can stay with us this way.
Talk to me about the production just very quickly, because let me tell you, kids these days don't know how hard you had it. It's being sent overseas where people are speaking a different language, so mouth movements are different. And so you've got to guide them not just with what you're doing with story, but how these characters should look as they speak. And it's insane. It's a crazy process because it's not like today where you're on a computer and everything's instantaneous.
I give credit to the artists and the production people, because I think one of the nicest things was, I think the emotions in the characters' faces, from moment to moment, come through beautifully. And we had limited time and limited money, but I think it goes down to Larry Houston directed the storyboards nicely. And I don't think you ever have a problem with understanding the emotions, but you're right. You're having people in Korea and the Philippines doing the animation, and hundreds of them working on one episode, and in moving the mouths and whatever, they just have the people organizing it here, the production people organizing it here, so intricately mapping out, saying mouth position here, mouth position here, mouth position here, and they had numbers for it, which on the writing side we didn't even get into, but was fascinated by, and that way they could all work on it and we get it back, and it looks like Wolverine is saying, you ink sucking gutter trash. And that was just to the Korean designing his mouth. It was just 479374794.
And that was, I'm jumping in here too, all the voice recording
Yeah,
took place in Toronto.
in Toronto, Canada.
So you would get audio cassettes back.
Yeah.
Production staff would get audio cassettes back.
And we would give notes, but and as you read in the book, at first they didn't quite understand how serious and adult we wanted the storytelling to be, because they'd done 10 years of animated, little kids shows.
Very talented voiceover artists in Toronto.
But the first time they tried to record the first two-part episode, it was just terrible. It was just very off. It was very wrong. And so gradually got talked into both hiring more, kind of Shakespearean actors, hiring more and directing them as adults. And once they got that, it went really very smoothly. I thought, considering that we weren't able to be there in the room with them, that we were able to just give notes on the side. That once they got the idea at the very beginning, after the first false start, we never had a concern about getting the voices back right. They were really sharp up there.
I remember reading the series Bible for Batman the Animated Series, and I think one of the things that Bruce Timm got absolutely right from the very beginning, I think it's the first line in their summary, is that they would never show that origin story. Like, we've seen Batman's parents be killed over and over again. Everyone knows it. Let's just move on. And I was wondering what the driving philosophy, or was there a driving philosophy like that behind the work you did on X-Men?
Interesting, I think, because you juggling a team with 8 players plus Xavier, trying to service each character, and the decision for the younger audience watching at home that Jubilee would be the character who would introduce the X-Men to the rest of us, because that was part of it. Margaret Loesch had said, we're doing the X-Men, but 90%, 95% of the general population, not the comic book fans, but the general population,
won't know who they are.
Don't know who they are. So you've got to introduce the concept of mutation and power and who can do what and what they can change into. That was what I think you were charged with doing.
Yeah. I think we talk about this a lot because it's a small community of writers and artists here. Most of the artists and writers worked on both shows. They knew each other. It's a friendly competition. And we looked it over and said, well, in Batman, everybody knows him right away. You've got this basically one person, and the show is more about the guest villains, because you pretty much know his motivation. You don't need to worry, you don't need to go into his backstory because it was a singular event, and so that's the set. The reverse for us with X-Men is that we had this wealth of people who we cared about just as deeply. We needed to care about each one just as deeply as the other. And so we found that helped with storytelling, because, if you told 2 or 3 really interesting rogue stories from her past, about her boyfriend and the Brood, if you got to know a little bit about her world, or about Cyclops' world, where he was separated from his parents when he was younger and put into an orphanage. These things, the X-Men backstories weren't really well known, except I think Wolverine was probably the one people probably knew a bit of the background of. But most of the 8 or 9, 10 of them, the viewing public really didn't know where they were from or what they were like, and so we saw that as a huge advantage, a really wonderful opportunity. We'll get all sorts of emotion out of if Gambit has to go back and deal with the woman that he left at the altar, that
Yeah.
there were 2 or 3 stories like that for each character that really resonated, that we picked from, bits and pieces from the 30 years of storytelling. Some of the characters are very new, so that we even, we were making up some of their backstory, but we saw it as very, very differently. Batman was so beautiful and so painterly
Oh my God.
that it was almost like that. It's almost like you didn't want the details of getting to somebody's family. You wanted to know. You wanted to watch Batman swoop through and have a 3 minutes
Yes.
of stunning animation in the darkened city. And in our case, we really couldn't make it look that pretty, so we found our drama in the characters, and the more stuff we could come up with about personal traumas and terrible moments from people's histories, like in the first X-Men movie, when you see Magneto being torn away from his parents in the concentration camp.
Yeah.
Those kind of things were what really made the characters deeper and informed the stories, and we looked for them everywhere we could find them. It's like introducing Nightcrawler. We thought, what's the most dramatic way we could introduce this man of faith, and not to be proselytizing or trying to be pro-Christian or anything, but just what's the most dramatic? Well, Wolverine's 95 years old. He's probably had faith once or twice in his life and maybe lost it. He would have struggled with it in a way that nobody else in the team might have. So let's throw him into an adventure. When we introduce Nightcrawler, use Wolverine's long life and deep-seated emotions to make the story resonate.
And I want to point out with the Nightcrawler story, I think initially it was Nightcrawler. Oh, German. Okay. Oh, Nazi gold. Well, it'll be a big fight
Right.
sequence.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
because that's what you do. But to the credit of
our executives, Sydney, I would have called up and said, you got all this James Bond adventure stuff going on there with people on snowmobiles chasing each other in big fights. Cut that out. This is all about this new character and his faith.
or introducing this new character.
Introduces new character and the question of faith. So, really, you're going to let us do that? And so, literally, from the outline to the script, we simplified and simplified and simplified, and just made it focus on Nightcrawler and Wolverine as much as we could.
And I want to point out that's one of my favorite episodes, but the fact that, and here's the word I use, the respect for Nightcrawler and his faith, the respect for anybody else who doesn't have faith. God bless Gambit. He's off eating ice cream and a shrimp cocktail saying, no, that's not for me. But we don't hate Gambit for that. We don't call him a heathen for that. It's just that's who he is. And the idea that Wolverine chooses to perhaps examine this, I think that's again, respect.
And I think I'm glad that you always had those voices among you telling you that, hey, it's okay to do this. Even for the audience, even as a comic book reader, I remember, I think one of my favorite Superman comics from a few years back, and I can't remember what it was called, I think it might be a Jim Lee one, is where Superman you spend the entire issue, he's in confession with a priest. And only when you reach the end of those 23 pages, you realize that not a single punch has been thrown. But even as a young reader, you are absolutely drawn to that issue and you are completely and utterly focused. And there hasn't been a bish bang boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it when, there's a trust in the audience, which kind of brings me to a process question, if you don't mind,
Sure.
because you guys have been doing this for so many years. And I don't ask this as a back in my day, but having worked in the industry where you worked with 22, 24, 40 episode seasons, you were constantly writing and writing and writing. And as a viewer, I think, and this is just my opinion, you don't have to agree with me, but I think something is lost with the 8 and 10 episode TV shows that we see, because I think there is an art that is missing. I think sometimes they seem so compelled to get to the point so quickly that we lose out on character and plot and narrative. And I was wondering, is there something to be said for those 22, 24 episode arcs? I know it must have been hell working on it because you're constantly forced to churn stuff out.
Yeah. Well, actually, there it was demanding, but we always have this discussion. Our schedules were so tight and we had to do so much so fast. There wasn't a lot of time for second thoughts.
That's
And,
true.
and a lot of struggle in Hollywood is you have a bunch of interested people and you think you've got the story just right. And someone says, well, but if we took this third of it out and they might have a quite reasonable suggestion, but like, let's say an animated, we were talking about for a while there, 20 years ago when animated features were big, 20, 30 years ago, Disney and DreamWorks and Pixar, they would work 4 years on us and they would redo the story 20 times. They would animate 2/3 of the movie, throw it out and just do it all. They had these huge budgets and 4-year times to tell one story. And I find that much more frustrating than working really hard and really fast and going with your first instinct. And okay, yes, we like that. Done. Next episode.
Mhm.
I don't know why it's more satisfying, but I found that on other projects where we had, let's say, more time on a larger budget, I would become frustrated. They said, well, you want an 8th outline for this story? I've told you the 7 ways I can imagine this. I'm just going to go back to number 1. There's just so many different. There are only a handful of different ways you can tell this story. Pick one, please. Because I'm happy with 3 or 4 of these. Let's just put one in production. So that's the frustration I felt.
By way of example here, if you can see, we have a poster for Young Hercules starring young Ryan Gosling. That was one of our favorite projects because we were charged with story editing, writing 50 episodes, right?
50, and it was 2 a week.
Now this was live action,
We-
which is a different muscle than animation requires.
It's actually a little easier.
But churning those out, boy, that was fun.
Yeah,
It was fun.
and so we had about a month to get started to set everything up and get maybe a dozen story ideas set, and then it was whoosh off to the races. And literally every week they'd need 2 new scripts finished because they would send over they shot it in New Zealand. They'd send it over to New Zealand and they'd have a crew waiting to do 3 days on one and 3 days on the next, day off, 3 days on one, 3 days on the next,
it
day
was
off.
a machine.
So that was, and we found that very satisfying.
Yeah.
We were exhausted by the end of it, but it was a happy, creative exhaustion. And much more prefer that to, well, do 2 stories, but redo each one 25 times.
Talk to me about navigating that tricky proposition. You talk about, I guess, grown-up TV versus children's TV. And I've always felt that writing for children's television is the hardest thing in the world. And I think there are only a few authors that strike that balance even with children's books. And, the Roald Dahls of the world and Enid Blytons kind of stand out because they never shy away from a certain amount of darkness. And I think they have faith and a confidence in their audience. You've been doing this for so many years. Is there a trick?
Well, okay. The only trick is who's in charge. And in our case, we had Sydney Iwanter and Margaret Lesh at Fox. Writing is for television is such a collaborative thing. And it can be very satisfying, but we have been in meetings where, for a children's show, where the on-staff psychologist didn't want a conflict between the characters because that could upset the children. Well, the story is conflict, and conflict comes from your characters. So what are we trying to do here?
I think I found an answer. This always surprises people, but of the 50 some shows I've had a pleasure to work on over the many years, many decades, my second favorite one to X-Men was Winnie the Pooh. And obviously you start with some wonderful stories. But I'm obviously, when I first was handed the opportunity, when we both worked at Disney, it's where we met in late 80s, and said, okay, how you've got these gentle little creatures and you want to create drama to drive, even if it's just a 12-minute story, to drive the story so that the kids are on the edge of their seats and wondering what's going to happen next. I said, how do you create conflict and drama amidst these gentle creatures that there's no sex, there's no violence, there's no, they're not in really serious physical danger,
And they love each
and they
other.
love each other. And the thing that the light bulb that hit, and I did, like I say, a whole episode that was just kind of based on this, was misunderstanding. Little children don't necessarily quite understand what's going on all the time. And I'd noticed there were a couple Pooh episodes, like one where I think Piglet thought that Pooh was moving away. He wasn't, but he misunderstood something that Tigger said. And so Piglet was absolutely distraught and was just, was suicidally miserable.
Well,
And gradually, other people had some other misunderstandings, and gradually people realized that, oh, you're not leaving, you're just going across the woods to give something to Christopher Robin, and you're coming back. Little children have these dramas in their head. They don't know. What do you mean? My friend won't be across the street anymore. Oh, well, they're moving to another school or another town. These things are life and death
to small children.
It's about children, but it can come from simply, it can come from either misunderstanding or not quite grasping what, and so who can be so dense at times, not understanding why something's happening. And he kind of started the ball rolling on that episode I did, and each one is misunderstanding what the other one's saying, and it kind of like goes around and comes back to the first one, and oh, that's what I said. And that, looking at ways to create for the little kids especially, because there's some shows that we do that are really need to be for 5 and under. I mean, that are very much even younger than the Pooh stories. Finding things that for the character is a big drama or a big joy or a big excitement, that a parent looking at it and said, oh, that just means that they're getting a new toy. Well, to the 3-year-old character in the show, it's the most exciting thing that's ever happened in their life.
Eric, Julia, I don't know if you've been on Twitter recently, but there are fully grown adults who have dramas going on in their brains. So
I'm on Twitter too much.
Yes. I'm of the mindset that I think if more grown-ups watch Bluey, the world would be a better place.
We are probably going to have to sit down and watch. I see so much. Oh my God, my heart got ripped out. It's like, I don't know if I'm got to be ready for Bluey.
The head writer on the show, Mark Edens, whose favorite movies are probably war movies and westerns and historical epics and intense adult dramas, was talking about, boy, this Bluey's really good.
Right?
That's the highest praise it's going to get.
My wife will walk in on me on a Saturday morning, and I'd be having cereal, watching Bluey, and crying a little. And she'd be like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, I'm getting ready for the baby.
No, that's good. I respect that. Yeah.
Before I let you go, just some inside baseball, because I've always been curious as to how this works. But when studios go, hey, there is a movie which is incredibly violent called RoboCop, let's make a cartoon for kids. Or Rambo, for example.
Yeah.
What is the logic? Because obviously, like, let me tell you something. I think I was far too young when I saw RoboCop for the first time. I loved it, but I shouldn't have been watching that much violence. And half of it had to do with the fact that I'd seen the cartoon and went, hey, this is really cool. Not your fault. I'm not blaming you. You can blame my parents for not having proper parental controls.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the real inside baseball theory on that is, what is who owns the underlying intellectual property on anything, and do they want to make a show? MGM happened to have some properties that it was interested in looking at as animated projects. One of those, God bless them, was RoboCop. Okay.
Yeah. So it's so much that out here in Hollywood, I mean, it's like any business really, but they have no idea what's going to be successful. They're going to say, I'm going to risk $5 million on this little show, and a year and a half from now, we'll see if 3rd graders around the world react to it well or not. And they don't know. They don't know for for adults. They don't know for children. Nobody knows. And that was a great William Goldman.
It's crazy that in 2024 that still holds true.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's the reason they will look at something like, well, RoboCop is a known name. They called it pre-sold value, marquee value, whatever it is.
Name recognition.
So they would rather do the 7th RoboCop animated show than try something new, because they have their bosses and their investors to react to. If the show does badly, so, well, but it's one of our best properties. I didn't make a mistake greenlighting that. If it's something new and it fails, then they have no protection.
Yeah.
So my worst case personal scenario on this, I worked at Hanna-Barbera for 2 years before 3 years at Disney, but really enjoyed it. Very nice people. But the worst case was some executives sold the idea to CBS television of doing a series called Popeye and Son.
Okay.
Right.
And I loved Popeye, the old, 1930s cartoons. And there's this grizzled guy that's cursing underneath his voice, and always just having these big fights with Bluto and just tearing up the scenery. And he's a crusty, nasty old sailor, and he's so funny. And then we start talking with the people at CBS, because a friend of mine and I were in charge with developing the show, or at least I was going to write for it. The friend developed it. I don't want to take any credit for it. And he said, oh, well, first of all, we can't have the son look at all like Popeye, because Popeye looks so weird. So they kind of drew him like Archie. And I said, well, okay, where's Oliver?
Because, the kids love Archie.
Then secondly, they said, oh, well, Popeye and Bluto can never fight. They can never punch each other. They can never, yell at each other. I said, well, why are you doing a Popeye show? And it was absolutely obvious. The only reason was because it was a pre-sold name. They had no interest in what we were going to do with the, it's just you can't do any of the things that makes Popeye fun, but do Popeye anyway. And that's just, it's a business thing that you get stuck with. And if you need to pay the rent, you write the stories.
Very quickly, tell me a story. And I ask you to tell me the story because I think you kind of allude to it in your book with regards to the massive influence that X-Men, the animated series, has had on the superhero projects of today. You kind of allude to it because you don't come right out and say, hey, we were responsible, you guys are too modest for that. But as viewers of the show, I think we pick up the sign. So as someone who grew up watching X-Men, the animated series, when I saw Bryan Singer's X-Men, I was like, oh, wait, I can see the sources of inspiration.
You picked the same team. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
Right,
but
yeah, no, just talk to me about that.
When X-Men, the animated show, hit, because it hit quick and it hit hard. It was #1 as soon as it started in January 93. Margaret Loesch, again, this amazing woman, went to the folks at Fox Live Action and said, there is an audience for this. You need to start thinking about making a live action film. It wasn't until 2 years after X-Men, the animated series, wrapped, that then they did come out with a film, but they picked the same team, and obviously made some changes, but and then X-Men, the film was a success. The next one was a success. And if it weren't for, and then suddenly Marvel had money, and then they could do Iron Man, then they could do.
Because they had just been bankrupt. They went bankrupt. Bankrupt in 96, and in 97 we finished the show. 98 they start developing the movie. Mm-hmm. They still don't have much money. They cross their fingers and hope the movie does $1 billion worth of business. The second one does even better. And so suddenly, well, hey, maybe we could build a universe off of this. And so, yeah, we very much are. I mean, we're trying to not brag too much about it, but we talked to the screenwriter of the first 2 X-Men movies, the one that got the credit, because David Hayter, very nice man, very talented man, who took, they must have done 20 versions of the first one, and he kind of held them all together nicely. But he said, yeah, Bryan Singer never picked up a comic book. He just watched our show. He just watched our show over and over. And I think the simple way of thinking about it is no one believed that the comics would make exciting television. And then they saw, oh, it could make exciting television. So the people that are used to dealing in audiovisual out here, the TV and movie makers, would naturally look towards what we had done to shift from the page to TV, to live characters, in effect. And so I think it was much easier for them to make the small adjustment from TV to movies than from the big adjustment from comics to TV. We'd kind of made the first 9 steps for them.
I will take it all the way to the grave that good old X-Men, the animated series, was either called the bridge or the gateway for an entire audience to find these properties. And, it's the year 2024. Love it or not, there are genres of film. There's film noir, there are westerns. Superhero is now a genre.
It didn't used to be.
It didn't used to be a genre. It didn't used to have that many films. And those films came as a result of a contribution from X-Men, the animated series, in my humble opinion.
I will take that to the grave as well. I watched the first episode of X-Men 97, and I'm not going to lie, I cried a little.
Aw.
They sent us the first 3 episodes to watch. Disney did, because I had interviewed the supervising director. And what I told him as well was what they did, which was very cool, which I hadn't seen in a very long time, was make Cyclops cool again. Yes. So they kind of broke away from this idea of Cyclops being the stuffed shirt and doing something amazing with his powers. And that was exciting. And then, of course, Morph finally gets his due in the opening credits. And I'm like, hello. But last question for you, and this is the obvious question that I'm sure you've been asked a million times. Let's talk about the opening theme song, because I think I spent the last 20 years of my life humming it at different points. And,
all credit to Ron Wasserman. He deserves all the credit in the world for that. Ron Wasserman was an employee of Swan Entertainment. He was the composer for the company. And he would get assignments, and it's just, this is your Monday work, this is your Tuesday, just work for them. So I believe it was Larry Hughes. I believe it was Sidney Iwaner and Will Mineo who would get, okay, here's an idea for the show. No, do it again. What? Okay. And it's like poor Ron ended up doing, like, for a man who didn't work that way, who didn't necessarily get asked to do multiples, like 20 times into it, came up with something that finally this is a song.
And I think Will and Sydney, they knew they needed something. They needed something propulsive. There were 2 stages. One was Will and Larry drew the storyboard for the opening minute sequence, like, in a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And he handed it in. Margaret and Will looked at it and said, you know what? It's a little short on identifying the characters, because there's so many characters and we really want the kids to remember who's who. So Will went in and put in the opening swoopings. Will's a very swoopy artist. We'll put in the swooping beginning, and they added the names and the logo, and Larry designed the logos, but they added the names and made sure each character was focused on.
And introduced their powers and gave them their names.
So that was, that opening was basically 4 days work from those 2 guys.
Amazing.
So Ron is working on the thing that they decided on. I mean, there were some other things pitched. There were Stanley wanted to narrate it. Mm-hmm. There were things that were sing-songy, like, these are the X-Men, hi, the special powers, hello. There was that kind of thing, and everybody just no. So I think Larry had the right instinct. He's a couple of years older, so he'll always be a couple of years older. We both grew up and we both loved Johnny Quest.
Yes.
1964. It was 1 season. People forget. It was only about 15 episodes. But the opening was just intense driving music with action bits from the show.
Hot drum.
That's all it was. And so Larry had that in the back of his mind when he drew the opening, and so probably he and Will and Sydney had something like that in the back of their mind, saying, we want something like that, only a little more modern and even more fast paced and driving than the Johnny Quest opening. So as she said, Ron wrote it and the basic bass beat was there, but no, add layers, make it even more intense. And they finally, number 20, 21, they all went, yeah, that's it. Yeah, they all agree. We could take no credit. Those guys did it.
Back in the 90s, when the show hit Malaysia, that was the first thing all of these 11 and 12-year-olds were talking about. Like, did you see that opening sequence? Like, it's unlike anything we'd seen before. And let me tell you this, I really hope they do an episode with, at some point, just as a throwaway, with Professor X in a van going across the country. Like, I think that would be hilarious, and it might work.
That's right. Yeah, I'm here on Porto Cerebro.
I got to show you a serious Easter egg, and this is going to be a little abstract here, but picture, if you have the book, you might have caught it in the opening title sequence, Gambit in the original series, animated series, when he's throwing his cards at the camera. Can you make that out?
Yes.
That's him with his diamond, his club. Okay, look at the ace of spades.
It's-
The pip was drawn upside down accidentally. None of us caught it. That made it all the way through. This is X-Men 97.
Yeah.
They went in, and God, this is not going to read, but they did it there too. They went
Did
in
it on
and
purpose.
drew it upside down on purpose.
Because of our
That's my kind of continuity.
I love when they do little things like that, even with episode 4, when they, in the opening credits, when they swap out Jean Grey with Madeline Pryor.
yeah.
I was just like, it's so smart. It's just little things like that we pick up and we get excited about. And it's attention to detail, because I think when I know they've done something like that, I know that nothing else in the series is by accident.
Body and soul, heart and soul.
That fills me with so much joy. Yeah, it fills me with so much joy. This has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I cannot tell you how thrilled I've been and how much I've been looking forward to this.
Well, this has been delightful, and thank you, thank your baby for being.
I will, for holding it in, for staying away. Thank you so much, and just once again, just for everything that you've done. It's been an absolute pleasure, and you've had a tremendous impact, not just on my life growing up, but a whole bunch of people here in Malaysia. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for letting us know
you.
that, woman. That's why you try to write stories in the first place. You want to connect with somebody, and this particular job was a gift to us that we'll keep on giving until we're 90.
Let's hope.
You have my email address. If you ever find yourself in my part of the world, drop me a line. I will show you around. I will take you for some good food.
We'll hold you to that.
Yes,
Absolutely.
because you never know. You never know.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. This was a real treat.
That was Eric and Julia Lewald. They are the OG showrunner and writer of the X-Men animated series from back in the 90s. Let us know what you think of X-Men 97. You can reach out on all of our social media feeds, GogglerMY. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline, 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.